All right, so get this. We're diving into something today that's pretty revolutionary. Imagine computers, but not the ones we're used to, not with like silicon chips and all those wires. I'm talking about computers built with, wait for it, actual living brain cells.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yeah, synthetic biological intelligence, SBI for short, and it's blending biology and technology in ways that would have sounded like pure science fiction just a few years ago.
It really is incredible how fast this field is advancing. Like, we've
Mm.
gone from just theories and ideas to actual products you can buy, all in such a short amount of time.
Exactly. And there's this company, Cortical Labs, that's really leading the charge here. They've developed this system called the CL1, which is essentially the first commercially available biological computer in the world. It's wild. You can actually buy one of these things now. They even unveiled it at a big conference in Barcelona just last year.
Yeah, that was a huge moment, the CL1's debut. The energy at that conference was palpable. That's the best way I can describe it. I mean, what's really fascinating about it is how it merges living neurons with those traditional silicon processors.
So how does that even work? I mean, how do you get brain cells to, like, talk to a computer chip?
Well, the key is this thing called a microelectrode array, MEA. It's basically this tiny grid of sensors that can detect the electrical activity in neurons, but it can also stimulate them. So when those neurons fire, the MEA picks up those signals and translates them, so to speak, into digital data that the silicon processor can then understand and use. And get this, it goes both ways. The processor can also send signals back to the neurons through the MEA, actually influencing how they behave.
So it's like a direct line of communication between the biological and digital worlds?
Exactly. And that's what lets the CL1 do some amazing things traditional AI just can't do. You see, traditional AI relies on algorithms, basically sets of pre-programmed instructions. They're great for tasks that are, predictable and well-defined, but when it comes to totally new situations or problems that need adaptation on the fly, that's when they struggle.
They're like those old robots you'd see in movies, the ones that could only follow a specific path and would go haywire if anything unexpected happened.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But with SBI, you've got a system that's constantly learning, adapting, evolving in real time. Those neurons in the CL1 can form new connections, strengthen old ones, even change their behavior based on what they experience.
That's what people often call emergent intelligence, right? But to be honest, that term always throws me off a bit. I think it can be kind of confusing, especially if you're not already familiar with the concept.
You're right, it's a term that can sound a little abstract. Emergent intelligence basically means that complex behavior can arise from a bunch of simple parts interacting, even if those individual parts aren't intelligent themselves. It's like, think about a flock of birds, how they all fly in formation. Each bird just follows simple rules, but the flock as a whole, their behavior looks incredibly complex, almost intelligent.
So with the CL1, each individual neuron might not be thinking in the way we usually understand it, but the whole network can demonstrate intelligent behavior, all because of how those neurons interact with each other and with the silicon processor.
Precisely. And this is what gives SBI the potential to leapfrog traditional AI. Instead of just being stuck with those pre-programmed instructions, SBI systems could actually learn and solve problems in ways we hadn't even thought of.
Now, I know Cortical Labs is really pushing the boundaries of what's possible in this field. I've heard them talking about this thing called a minimal viable brain. What's that all about?
Ah, the Minimal Viable Brain, or MVB. It's Cortical Labs' big, ambitious long-term goal. They're aiming to create a self-sustaining biological neural network that can handle complex tasks, but without needing constant input or control from us. Just picture it. A network of neurons in a lab, learning, adapting, making decisions all on its own.
It's like they're trying to create a brain in a jar, but with a much more, well, sophisticated purpose. And if I'm getting this right, the CL1 is kind of like a stepping stone on the way to achieving that, right?
Exactly. The CL1 proves that it's actually possible to connect living neurons with silicon processors and have them work together. But the MVB, that's the ultimate goal, a system that could potentially be as complex and adaptable as a human brain, but without all the limitations of our biological hardware.
It's a wild concept, for sure. But it makes you think, if we're creating systems that can learn and make decisions on their own, then what does that mean for our understanding of intelligence itself? And, what are the ethical implications of creating things that might be capable of independent thought?
Those are some seriously deep questions, ones we'll definitely need to explore more.
Yeah.
But before we get too philosophical, I think it's worth looking at some of the potential real-world uses for SBI. This technology has the potential to revolutionize so many industries, from healthcare to transportation, manufacturing, I mean, you name it.
Okay, let's get into that then. Let's talk about how this mind-blowing technology could actually be used in the real world. I'm definitely curious to hear more. So we're talking SBI, this crazy mix of living brain cells and silicon and how it could totally change the game in different industries. Where do you think we'll see the biggest impact first?
I think healthcare's got to be at the top of the list. One of the most profoundly impacted areas. We talked about drug discovery a bit earlier, but let's dig a little deeper into that. Think about the process now. It takes forever, costs a fortune, and there's so much trial and error. SBI could change all that.
You mean like using those brains in a dish to actually test out new drugs and treatments?
Exactly. Imagine, like, building personalized models of a patient's brain with their own cells. You could test different drugs, different therapies on these models and see how they react, all without, putting the patient at risk. It'd be a total game changer for things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, epilepsy, those conditions that are so hard to treat right now.
And this would be like way faster and more efficient than the drug testing they do now, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
The traditional methods, they often rely on testing on animals, which doesn't always translate perfectly to how a drug will interact with the human brain. Plus, those trials can take years, and we're talking millions of dollars. But with SBI, we can speed things up significantly, get those life-saving treatments to people much faster.
It sounds almost too good to be true, you know? But what about beyond drug discovery? Where else in healthcare could SBI make a difference?
Prosthetics is another area that could be totally revolutionized. Imagine a prosthetic limb, but not just a mechanical device. I'm talking one controlled by the user's own neural signals. SBI could be the bridge between the brain and that prosthetic, allowing for much more natural, intuitive control.
So you're saying a future where people with prosthetic limbs could actually regain a sense of touch, even like fine motor control.
Exactly. And it's not just limbs. Think bigger. SBI could even lead to neural implants for people with spinal cord injuries. Imagine that, helping them regain movement and sensation.
The possibilities are pretty incredible, but I also wonder about the challenges. Building these complex systems, integrating them with the human body, it all seems so difficult.
Oh, the challenges are definitely there.
Hmm.
One of the big ones is scalability. Right now, these SBI systems are, well, relatively small and quite expensive. If we want to make them available to everyone, we need to figure out how to produce them more efficiently and get the cost down.
Yeah, like those old computers that took up entire rooms, we eventually got to the laptops and smartphones we have today.
Good analogy. Another hurdle is biocompatibility. We need to be sure these devices can interact with the human body safely, long-term, without causing any bad reactions.
So it sounds like there's still a lot of work to be done before we see SBI being used everywhere in healthcare.
For sure, there's a way to go.
Right.
But the potential benefits are so huge that I'm confident researchers will overcome these challenges. And healthcare is just one area, robotics is another promising field where SBI could really shake things up.
Okay, robots. Now that's something I think a lot of people can get excited about. What kind of robotic applications are we talking about here?
Well, think about all the things robots still struggle with. Tasks that need adaptability, thinking on their feet, real-time decision-making. Traditional AI systems have a hard time with those things, but SBI could be the answer. It could unlock a whole new level of capability in robotics.
So we're not just talking about robots putting cars together on an assembly line. We're talking about robots that can navigate difficult, unpredictable environments, interact with humans in a more natural way, maybe even do delicate things like surgery.
Exactly. SBI could allow robots to actually learn from experience, adjust to new situations, and make decisions based on what's happening around them in real time, much like a human would.
It sounds like a whole new generation of robots, robots that are smarter, more versatile, and potentially, more integrated into our lives.
Precisely. And this kind of brings us back to those deeper questions we were talking about earlier.
Hmm.
If we're making robots that can learn, adapt, make decisions on their own, then what does that say about how we define intelligence? Where's the line between a tool and, well, an actual entity?
It's a pretty big question, isn't it? I mean, there's already a lot of debate about the ethical side of AI, and SBI seems like it could take those concerns to a whole new level.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important that we're having these conversations now while this technology is still in its early stages. We need to think carefully about what could happen if we create machines that might one day be as smart as humans or even smarter.
I agree, but, it's also important to remember that SBI has the potential to do a lot of good in the world, too.
Of course. We've talked about healthcare and robotics, But there are also potential uses in areas like environmental monitoring, disaster relief, even space exploration.
So we're really talking about a technology that could help us solve some of humanity's biggest problems.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole field so exciting. We're not just working on new tech, we're exploring new possibilities for what humans can achieve.
It's a lot to take in, but I think that's what makes the deep dive so interesting. We get to dive into these complex, sometimes mind-blowing topics and try to make sense of them together.
It's definitely a journey for all of us. And speaking of journeys, I think it's time we moved on to the final frontier of SBI.
And we're back, ready to wrap things up, finish our deep dive into synthetic biological intelligence.
It's been, well, a pretty wild ride, right?
Yeah.
From how those neurons actually talk to silicon, to SBI, potentially changing entire industries,
Yeah.
and even making us rethink what intelligence really is.
You know, one thing that really stuck with me was that idea of the minimal viable brain, that big goal Cortical Labs has. You touched on it earlier, but it's just so fascinating. I'd love to really unpack that a bit more. What's the main drive behind trying to create something like that?
The MVB, it's a potential game changer, a
Yeah.
huge leap forward. Imagine like a network of neurons that can sustain itself, capable of doing complex stuff, but without us having to constantly feed it input. It wouldn't just be mimicking us, it'd be a whole new type of intelligence, evolving right there in the lab.
So not just copying our brains, but creating a new species of thinking system.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, philosophically speaking. I mean, this thing can learn, adapt, solve problems in ways we didn't program it to. Can we really say it's, I don't know, conscious in some way? It really makes you question what thinking even means.
It definitely takes us beyond just the practical uses of SBI and into some pretty deep ethical and philosophical territory. It's a lot to think about.
It is. And that's part of what makes this field so captivating. We're not just building better machines, we're grappling with these huge questions about the nature of intelligence, consciousness, maybe even life itself.
It feels like we're barely scratching the surface of what SBI could mean for the future.
Yeah, just the beginning.
Yeah.
But the progress, it's incredible. I mean, the CL1, it's a first step, but it proves that this isn't just science fiction anymore. It's real. It's happening right now.
So for our listeners who are, just starting to grasp all this, what's the one key thing you'd want them to take away from this deep dive into synthetic biological intelligence?
I think I'd say this. SBI, it's not just a small improvement in computing. It's a potential revolution. It's merging the biological and the digital in a way that could redefine not just our technology, but our whole understanding of what it means to be intelligent.
Well said. And for those who want to dig deeper, where should they go? Where can they learn more?
Cortical Labs website's a great place to start. They have a lot of info about their work. Plus, there are tons of articles and research papers online that really delve into the science and the implications of SBI.
And of course, as always, we encourage everyone to join the conversation on our social media. Tell us what you think, what questions you have, any reactions to what we talked about today. We want to hear it all.
Absolutely. As we move forward with SBI, it's more important than ever to have these open conversations and really stay informed.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into synthetic biological intelligence, I think it's safe to say the future is looking pretty fascinating and maybe a little mind-blowing.
Totally agree. It's a future full of possibility, and one we'll definitely be keeping an eye on as this field keeps evolving.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those brain cells firing, whether they're the biological kind or the synthetic kind.